Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Neurotech has just recently announced their breakthrough results with their NTI164 in paediatric studies of children with ASD. Today, we're joined by Dr. Alex Andrews, Gerald Quigley, and Brian Leedman from the company. The session will be run at the start in a listen-only mode with questions to be asked through the dialogue box through the webinar. Alex will be starting the session with a 15-minute presentation, and the Q&A will be available for 20 minutes at the end. Please feel free to send the questions throughout the session, and again, they'll be answered at the end. The presentation from today will be available by the company website and the ASX shortly. Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Amali. So let's get into these results. I'm very excited to share them with you. You probably are familiar with Neurotech already since you are joined into this webinar, but I'll just give you a snapshot. So Neurotech is a biopharmaceutical company developing new solutions for a wide range of neurological diseases. Primarily, we are focused right now on autism spectrum disorder. We've just completed our phase 1/2 trial where we've shown some remarkable results. I'll get into those later, but just to tell you that the product we've got is called NTI164. It's a whole plant product which contains medicinal cannabis. Specifically, it's unique properties that contain high levels of minor cannabinoids and little to no THC. We've got the exclusive worldwide license to develop and commercialize this product, and patents have been lodged, so it's incredibly covered across all the major markets, and it's very unique, so no one else can copy us. Our capital structure. Our share price has gone up a bit today, but we are sitting around 7.5 cents. We've got 2.3 mil cash in the bank. We've got an R&D tax rebate coming in August, September for around $800,000 and 697 million shares on issue. I'll just add in here that last time I did a Share Cafe presentation, I was asked a question around whether we have any at-the-market facilities, and the answer to that question is no, we do not. This is our capital structure. It's pretty straightforward. So what makes NTI164 different? Well, as I said, high CBDA. That's very unique and different to the other drugs out there on the market, which are all either a CBD or a CBD THC. Naturally, we've got less than 0.3% THC, which is unique, and a lot of other companies go to great lengths to extract the THC from their products, but we don't have to because our product naturally grows like this. And full patient protection. It's a comprehensive, full-spectrum cannabis-based product with very unique properties. On to the phase 1/2 trial results, which I know you're waiting to hear. Our phase 1/2 trial in autistic kids was conducted out of the Monash Children's Hospital in Melbourne under the guidance by Professor Michael Fay. And Michael Fay has been involved with many previous trials in this area before, very experienced. It was an open label trial with 14 kids aged 8 to 17. We looked at different doses, escalating doses, and it was incredibly comprehensive with how many assessment points we looked at. Lots of parameters around anxiety, participation, irritability, hyperactivity, and the key symptoms that you get with autism. The results showed us that out of those that participated, 93% showed improvement. This is marked, and so 64% of participants showed much improvement, 29% minimal improvement, and 7%, which was actually only one child, showed no change. Importantly, there was no one that went backwards. There was no negative side effects. We only saw positive changes in these kids, with one kid who had no change. Pretty astounding for any trial, and paediatric populations are even more difficult. So it was very exciting and very promising. We announced previously the no washout period, whereby the parents applied to the ethics committee at Monash and asked that their kids not be removed from the trial. So that was an interesting development that happened last month, and we've now received HREC confirmation, Human Research Ethics Committee confirmation, that we do have approval to continue this trial further. So those kids will remain on the treatment if they choose to do so. As I said, no serious adverse events were recorded, and this was across all doses. Why we see this being such an important aspect of the trial is because the other drugs out there, like risperidone, have got such seriously negative side effects, things like weight gain, sedation, and breast growth in little kids. We saw none of these effects, and we're very pleased about that. Professor Michael Fay has been an incredible support and a wealth of knowledge for us. We have worked closely with him now for over a year and look forward to doing our next trial with him. He's been involved with medicinal cannabis trials before. He's also on the advisory committee to the government, Australian government, around medicinal cannabis. And his previous experience with clinical trials has included Tilray and the GW Pharma trial. So he's definitely got a lot of experience in this area. Why do we target autism? It's incredibly prevalent, with 1 in 44 kids in the US having autism. That's 1 in every classroom. It's incredibly difficult for not only the kids themselves, but also their families. And why it's particularly difficult is because there is currently no good treatment options available. Risperidone being the only FDA-approved drug to treat it, and Ritalin, which is often prescribed off-label. And these drugs have got the side effects which include things like, as I mentioned, the weight gain and the breast growth, but also insomnia, anxiety, and uncontrollable muscle spasms. Yet they're still incredibly profitable. The treatment market size of risperidone alone is $1.85 billion every year. So clearly there's a huge need and desire to have these treatments. And that's where we see ourselves coming in, because NTI has now completed the world's first trial using a whole plant, low THC medicinal cannabis strain to treat kids with autism. And we've shown positive benefit in a battery of assessments, and importantly, shown little to no side effects and no regression of disease. So this can only be seen as a strong positive, and we're very pleased with these results. Our current and future opportunities, well, we are very focused on autism right now, and we look forward to commencing our phase 2/3 trial this year. We're also looking into starting a cerebral palsy trial later this year, and there are these other incredibly large markets which we will be addressing. Now that we've demonstrated safety and efficacy in these paediatric populations, the world's our oyster, and we can take this product into other huge opportunities like these. Our pathway to commercialisation is still heavily focused on the FDA. We see this as having the biggest potential upside, and we'll also be exploring the combination therapies that I've touched on in previous announcements. So that includes combining NTI164 with other blockbuster off-label, off-patent drugs, things like prednisolone, diclofenac, which is Voltaren, and Celebrex. So lots of opportunities here. All right. Our paid position is incredibly strong. We've got composition that has been patented, composition of matter and combination therapies. We've patented not only the strains as they occur in nature, but we've also patented synthetic variations. And we've completed our international prior art search ahead of time. So we've confirmed that there's no one else out there doing what we are doing. Our developmental program timeline is looking like this. We will be going to the US FDA, where we'll be initiating discussions about getting sign off on our roadmap that we've got to go forward. We'll do that in person in Washington, then be ready to commence our phase 2 clinical trial at Monash Children's Hospital. We'll then be starting our phase 1/2 trial in cerebral palsy early next year and completing our phase 2 trial in autism mid next year. So what you can see here is we've got a very clear roadmap for the next 12 months and beyond. We've got a highly experienced team of board members and executives, Brian Liebman and Gerald Quigley. We've got them on the call, so I will not delay getting to the question and answer time where you can get to meet them. Why invest in NTI? Well, we do have an incredibly experienced board and management team. We've got a unique biopharmaceutical product that no one else is developing, and we've shown efficacy in these kids with autism. And as I said, showing efficacy in a paediatric population like this is difficult, and we're very proud of the fact that we've been able to do so. We've also demonstrated the safety, which is really key because that's what the FDA is going to be wanting to look at, those two things, safety and efficacy. We've got other clinical programs underway, and we've got significant near-term and long-term milestones with lots of news flow coming. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and let us go to the questions and answers.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Alex. So just a reminder to everyone, there is a question box available below, so feel free to keep sending your questions through throughout the Q&A session, and we'll pop them in there. So obviously this one's either for you, Alex, or Gerald. Throughout the trial, it says patients who we touch on the no washout period, so maybe we can elaborate a little bit more on that. The question is, I assume patients are still using NTI164 after their 28-day period. Is this correct? And will there be further updates in due course about their improvements at different points in time?
Yes, absolutely. We are still collecting more data on these same kids. They are continuing on the treatment. Gerald, is there anything?
And as an aside, if I may, yes, for any clinical trial to be encouraged to continue is quite remarkable. It normally doesn't happen. And this again backs up the efficacy and the safety profiles that have been so carefully monitored.
Perfect. And then maybe to you, Gerald, this question here. The trial, and I know you just recently joined, but obviously you've been watching the story closely. So the trial showed improvement in 93% of the patients. Was there an expectation going into the trial for the company?
Clinical trials are complex things to organise, and normally there's an expectation of perhaps a quarter to a half of participants where you might see improvements. Here we've got 93% of participants, so it far exceeded our expectations. Now, the trial was designed with safety in mind, but efficacy endpoints are included. And these are really important to focus on as the phase 2/3 trial starts. But essentially, in summary, to see such an incredibly powerful signal of efficacy after 28 days of treatment has just blown us away.
Great. So another question here, this one's around the number of children in the studies. So I guess the question starts with, firstly, it's great to hear the positive results about the trial. The sample size was rather small. Can we elaborate on why there was only 14 children, and will there be a larger sample size going forward?
Yeah, sure. The study was designed for safety as a primary endpoint. So that's why we chose the number of 20 initially. there was some dropout due to unpredicted consequences. The study was done, mind you, in the height of COVID. So this is where we had 4 kids that which got COVID quite badly. Their whole families were impacted, and it was during the lockdown in, is it March? And so you can imagine what parents were thinking, going into the hospital to take their kids to these appointments, which is why we did see a bit of a dropout. 2 kids also had surgeries, and that meant that they were excluded for that reason. So that's the reason for our sample size being what it was, and it was still powered adequately for the safety outcomes, and the efficacy is just an absolute bonus. Going forward to do our larger phase 2/3 trial, we will be having a larger sample size.
Perfect. And so there's a follow-on question from that, from another, I guess, dialed-in investor here. How many children or how many kids are still continuing the treatment?
My understanding is that all 14 are continuing the treatment at this point.
Great. So, obviously Gerald's just kind of jumped in here, and I think we've kind of jumped around straight into questions. So it's really good to pop back and have a little chat to yourself there, Gerald, and talk about why did you join the board, and what do you see that's so unique about NTI164 and Neurotech in general?
When we look at autism spectrum disorder, or in fact any neurological issue, the approved treatments at the moment are fairly narrow. There's not a lot, and Alex has mentioned risperidone for autism spectrum disorder. It's the indicated drug certainly in Australia as well for this. It's not an easy drug to manage. It's not an easy drug for children to have to cope with the adverse effects. So for us to see in these other children such a positive adverse effect free outcome is quite remarkable, and certainly in clinical trial land that isn't normal. So quite outstanding. And the neurological issues involving neuroinflammation, that opens up other avenues as time goes by. But remember, this is a paediatric study, one very carefully designed, and the results speak for themselves.
That's great. So another question that's popped through is, do you expect to increase the trial locations, so this is for Gerald and Alex, the trial locations within other states?
Yes, we do. And I know Brian and I are very keen to expand to Perth.
An idea on, oh yeah, sorry, Brian, yeah?
I'm just saying that I'm very keen to have it expanded into Perth, but it may well be that we already have a partner in Monash, so that's a great partner to have, and that's where the primary phase 2/3 trial will be conducted. We may well expand to other clinical sites for the phase 2/3 trial, but certainly for other indications, like I'm particularly keen on ADHD. I think that's a tremendous market for us. There's no shortage of kids in the ADHD space for recruitment, and I certainly like to see at least one of the sites being in Perth for that.
So obviously there, while we have you there, Brian, let's just kind of elaborate one of the other questions that's come through. The results, do the results from this trial encourage you to plan studies for other neurological diseases? So you've just touched on ADHD. So maybe you can just elaborate a little bit further on that, and what your thoughts are around that.
Sure. Thank you, Emily. I would have thought this is an interesting space because we didn't actually know whether or not we were going to get any efficacy results from this trial. This was really just based on the preclinical evidence that we had and the anti-inflammatory properties of this unique strain, that this could well have a beneficial effect in an indication like autism. We didn't know. That's why this result that we produced today was so critically important for us, because it could well have been a duster. We had no idea, but how fabulous is it that we've already demonstrated safety and now efficacy? I'm intrigued by drugs that can treat neurological conditions because it's such a terribly unmet market. The drugs themselves are horrible. They've got serious side effects. They're not particularly effective. One thing we know about cannabis, it's a very safe drug, and we demonstrated that in this trial with no adverse events across the entire patient population. So we would expect that this drug would be safe for all indications that we pursue. The question is it efficacious? And it certainly is for ASD based on these current results. So what about other indications like ADHD? They have similar drugs that are used to treat ADHD as they are for ASD. In fact, very often kids that are diagnosed with autism are actually ADHD or vice versa. So if there's the same drug group that treats both sets of patients, and we've shown efficacy in one, why not necessarily show efficacy in another? And what a tremendous market ADHD would be, in addition to other indications like cerebral palsy or MS. We will, as a board, will decide what we will focus on next, and it will definitely be, I believe, for the best interest of shareholders.
That's great. So moving into these next phase of trials, Alex and Brian, this is a question directed to you guys. Can we talk a little bit about the company's cash balance and what we expect the spend will be to get through these upcoming trials?
Sure, I'll answer that one. So we have 2.3 in the bank. We've got another 800,000 expected through the R&D rebate. That was what we got last year. Certainly, we've been spending a lot of our cash burn on running our clinical trials. So we can expect to get that lovely R&D rebate shortly and also going forward. There's no doubt that the cost of the next clinical trial is going to be a lot more expensive because it's going to be a much larger trial. We only had 20 kids initially in this trial. I suspect the next trial is going to be, somewhere in the 50 to 100 mark. I will say already that Monash is lined up at least 150 kids to be part of the next trial. So there's no shortage of kids that want to be part of this next ASD study. And recruitment is going to be a really important news flow item for us because I think we can recruit very quickly. So in terms of our cash needs, right now we're sufficient. We can progress as we are. We're not particularly low on cash. Do we need to raise capital at some point in the future? Certainly. It's a much more expensive trial. It's a bigger trial. It's a bigger study, and we have other indications that we want to pursue as well. So it's not something that we need to do right now, but it's something that we'll consider down the track.
Thanks, Brian. So Alex, this question's for you. So how do the results achieved in the trial compare with other trials previously undertaken with patients with ASD?
It's incredibly difficult to compare two different trials because each trial has got different inclusion and exclusion criteria, different doses and all sorts of things. But the closest trial I can probably point to would be the HOPE trial that was conducted in kids with autism using a CBD and THC combination trial. And that was quite inconclusive results, but they definitely did notice quite a lot of side effects, including things like sedation, which we did not have. So that's a positive. And the other trials, it's very difficult to really compare. Gerald might have some more thoughts on this though.
I think the most important thing in all of this is we're talking about neuroinflammation. And going back to autism as a starting point, this isn't something you just go along and have a blood test for. This is a behavioural diagnosis where a whole group of practitioners work together. And one interesting side point to this is that the children who were part of the trial were much happier with the other clinicians who were working with them as part of their usual treatment. So it had a flow-on effect from as any treatment that's successful in ASD, where the child, sure, that's the condition, but it's almost like dropping a stone into a pond. You have a ripple effect of benefits going all the way out, and that's no doubt is happening.
That's great. So just while obviously we've got you there, Gerald, can you elaborate then? So we've talked about comparing to other ASD trials, but what actually makes NTI164 to the actual other CBD and THC strains that we've been hearing about around the world?
It will be the very, very low THC content. As Alex mentioned, the HOPE trial had a combination of CBD and THC, and many of the adverse effects are associated with THC. So to see a product where we don't have to remove the THC, it just when it grows, there's incredibly small, very tiny, if any, amounts in there, puts a safety profile from the whole plant extract into perspective. So that's the clear difference. The NTI164 has no measurable, very little measurable THC. You'd never probably consider using a THC product in a child anyway, and this again has been able to be shown a number of times over in the trial that there hasn't been one issue whatsoever.
In terms of what I see the major point of difference is that, as far as I'm aware, we're the only cannabis company on the ASX that is not focusing on CBD or CBD THC. We have all these unique minor cannabinoids. We're not CBD, we're not THC, we're CBDA, CBDG, all these minor cannabinoids that are working in combination to create a very unique effect. It's not replicable. So if we effectively get a result ultimately that says that we can treat ASD, for example, you can't just go out and say, well, let's just take CBD oil and see if we can get the same result, because you won't. And it also makes us licensable because we have that unique compound that can't be replicated. And if we show the safety and efficacy as we move forward, as we have already done so, then we will become very interested to partner with Big Pharma, because Big Pharma are looking for something they can license. And that's what we have, something that's licensable. It's not a homogenous thing like CBD.
That's great. So obviously then talking about the NTI164 plant there, Brian, can you just, one of the questions that's come up, is it a GMO plant?
No.
No, sorry, Alex. So did you hear that? So is it a GMO plant? So no, it's not. So maybe just talk a little bit about the origin of the plant or NTI164, Alex.
Sure. So NTI164 came out of the Yunnan province in China back in 1989. It was brought across by a cannabis enthusiast, and it's been developed and finessed over time. It's been selected to naturally grow with little to no THC. And interestingly, the initial purpose for researching this plant was for hemp purposes, for growing, for fabrics and textiles. But this is through Dolce Can Global. And we have since licensed this product in order to look at the neurological benefits of it in kids.
Thanks, Alex. So one of the next questions that's popped up is that, speaking back about the studies, is there any plans to have adult testing on the drug across ASD and AHD, or is just the focus at the moment to remain on children?
The focus is going to be, our real focus is going to be on autism for the next foreseeable future, when we are going to finish off our phase 2-3 trial. We'll start it first and then finish it, and that is in paediatrics. In terms of going into ADHD, we haven't got we haven't finalised whether we'll be doing that in kids or an adult population yet. Cerebral palsy is another area that is going to be in paediatrics, and yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
I think also that we're only limited by our cash position. So, based on the excitement that we generate, then we can, in terms of raising more capital in the future, and we can pursue multiple targets. But from my perspective, I think we need to show that it definitely works in at least one indication that gets the interest of Big Pharma. Big Pharma tends to say, well, okay, you've done the good work, you've shown it works, so now here's a big check. That tends to be their attitude. And so I think for us, I'd like to get us to a position where we can attract the interest of Big Pharma, who are already paying attention to what we're doing. We've already had discussions with them about our drug, but no licensing opportunities at this point in time, but I'm optimistic that we'll get there.
Okay, thanks. So Gerald, I've got a couple of questions for you, obviously given your experience and background. What's the regulatory pathway that Neurotech's following with respect to getting NTI164 registered? And if successful, what markets will become available to you?
The regulatory pathways need to be followed very carefully, and that will be done. And we would expect within the next few years that will be fulfilled. There's, I think, as Alex mentioned, there'll be explorations and face-to-face meetings with the FDA as soon as we possibly can, and to make sure all the regulatory pathways and requirements are met. That's the mandate of the company.
That's great. And so there's a kind of another second part to this question. Is there any relevance to a neuroceutical pathway for NTI due to its low THC content and no adverse events?
I think further research will probably prove that, but let's wait and see. And it's important that we do it all correctly. and with the best possible team around as we do. But certainly from a clinician's perspective, this is one of the most exciting developments in neurological diseases ever, and incredibly exciting developments.
Great. And then, so just adding on to that, Gerald, if the phase 2 and 3 trials are successful, when do you expect to have this product available for consumers?
Well, all going well, that will depend on regulatory pathways, but you would expect within 2 or 3 years, and that would be reasonable, Brian, wouldn't it?
Sure. It depends on what point you enter in discussions with big pharma. I mean, the earlier that you do it, the less size of a deal that you might do, but a deal is still enormous from any perspective. I mean, I've had recent experience with another company of mine that's currently being acquired by Pfizer. That's a tremendously exciting thing. I created the company to be acquired by a big pharma or a big technology company at some point. It's not very often that it actually happens, but I believe if you've got something that's unique, that's not replicable, and it's promotable, then this company ticks all the boxes to be getting into bed with a big pharma at some point.
So Brian, one of the questions that's kind of popped through, you can elaborate a little bit there with big pharma and multinational companies. Are you currently in any discussions regarding partnerships with these companies or any companies?
I can confirm that we've had inbound interest from at least 2 big pharmaceutical companies, household names. They have been inquiring about our product and waiting for the results to come, which only happened today. So there has been inbound interest. There's been no licensing discussions, which you wouldn't expect at this point in time, but we certainly have their interest. I can also confirm that we've had inbound interest from large nutraceutical companies, which is another thing. So these things have happened relatively early before we even got close to releasing the results. It was purely because we've got something that's unique, that has the potential to transform the way neurological disease is treated, and it's licensable, which is one of the big points that I make to all investors. I don't see the point in investing in a biotech company that has effectively doing a treatment with a homogeneous product that anybody can produce. I don't know how you make money in that model. Whereas in our case, we've got a patented technology, it's unique, it's licensable. That's why I chose to be involved in the company in the first place.
So let's dive a bit further into that, Brian. And you've been involved in a number of successful biotech companies, and you've touched a little bit on Pfizer with ResApp. How do you rate the opportunity that NTI164 presents when compared to some of the success stories you've been involved with in the past?
It's thanks for that question. It's, if I think about the biggest thing I've ever been involved with thus far is a company called Imaging, which I co-founded about 8 years ago. It's now worth about $1.8 billion. They're only in phase 2 clinical trials. It does have a terrific story in terms of a unique way to be able to treat breast cancer, but this story is no less engaging because it is an easy story to tell. It's understandable. That's what attracts me to all the companies I've been involved in, is can I tell the story and can it be told in a way that investors can comprehend rather than some very strange or scientific presentation. We're not like that. So it is, I think, the most promotable company that I've yet been involved in, and these companies I have been involved in have been very successful to date, and I think that Neurotech is going to be the most successful company to date for me.
It's great. That puts the company into a great position there, especially having the board, the new board appointments and the likes. Just to give everyone an update, we have run over a little bit over time, but we've got quite a few more questions coming in, so we're going to continue for about another 5 minutes. What we'll be looking to do with the company is to provide and release to the ASX a full Q&A after the session. So that will be available and released early next week as well. So if we don't get through to your questions today, we'll aim to come back to you at some point with those with an official Q&A that released to the ASX. But we're going to run through just a couple more now. So Alex, you can maybe provide us a little bit of update about this, about the patent positions. Can you expand on the patents that were lodged in October? Have the patents actually been granted, or is this still pending final grant?
Yeah, so they were lodged in October last year, and the way patents go is that it takes a year for them to be granted. So we'd expect them to be approved and lodged where they have been lodged, and we expect them to be granted in October this year. And usually what companies would do then would be to commence doing an international prior art search. But we jumped the gun and we decided to do that earlier to make sure that there was no one else doing this prior art. So yes, we feel confident that our patents do cover us, and that's our position. So we're waiting until October for them to be finalised.
That's great. So we've talked about other uses for NTI or other therapies that the company is looking to explore with specifically NTI164 based on these results. But can maybe Gerald expand a little bit on the combination therapy? We've had some results around prednisolone and diclofenac recently. Can we expand a little bit on those and what the plans are for that pathway?
Sure. Both diclofenac and prednisolone are relatively well-known and often used prescription medications, and they also come with a raft of adverse effects. And it is therefore logical that if you can reduce the inflammation, the neuroinflammation around conditions where they will be involved, you potentially can use a much lower dose of that particular medication, therefore lowering the side effect profile and probably at the end of the day making a happier patient who will be consistently able to get their quality of life back by using the combination. Again, exciting times, and this is a wonderful opportunity to pair with big pharma companies and increase the versatility of their own medications.
That's great. Thank you very much, Gerald. I think we might wrap it up from there if everybody's happy with that. We've got a couple more questions that have come in, but as I said, we'll answer them in a formal Q&A release to the market next week. The presentation is now available on the ASX and the company website. If anybody joining today does have any questions, the media contacts were on the back of the release today, so feel free to reach out to Alex, Brian or myself and we'll be able to assist you with those. But thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. Anything else to say from you, Alex and Brian?
No, I'd just like to say I want to thank the whole team at Neurotech for what a terrific achievement that we've made today. And also we've got very supportive shareholders as well. So it's really been a terrific team effort. And I'd also like to welcome Gerald officially to our board. What a great addition you will be and currently are. And also to Alex, a recent appointment for me. She's been terrific in the role. And thank you, Amali, for creating this opportunity today.